Good afternoon. Today at Google, we're delighted to welcome Mr. Robin Sloan. Mr. Sloan grew up in Detroit and attended Michigan State, where he co-founded a literary journal called Oates. After college, he went to work at the intersection of media and technology, first in St. Petersburg, Florida at the Poynter Institute, and then in San Francisco at Current TV and Twitter. His first novel, Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, went on to become a New York Times bestseller, and it was called by George Saunders a tour de force, after which Mr. Sloan has politely requested that no further commentary on his writing be offered, ever. He's here today to discuss his second novel, titled Sourdough. Please join me in welcoming to Google, Mr. Robin Sloan.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out. There's a nice, intimate crowd here in the flesh, but I understand there are some more people watching virtually, and of course, more people online later. So here's what I would like to propose. I want to tell you a couple of stories about this book, one about where the idea came from in the first place, and one about where this book kind of ended up for me, or like where I ended up maybe after writing it. And then I want to offer something else. It's actually pretty googly. This is something that I do all over at bookstores and reading festivals, but in a way it's even more apropos here, and it's something that I don't think you've ever heard at a book reading before. And then, of course, I'll have time to answer some questions if you have them, and we'll wrap it up. Does that sound like a good plan? OK. So this new book, Sourdough, came about shortly after I had wrapped up the manuscript for my first novel. It was titled Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. And I was in that state of mind that follows. I think only a first novel can kind of put you in this space, because you guys might have heard this before. There's sort of a saying or a cliche about first novels, which is that an author just opens up their head and pours in everything. Every thought they've ever had, every dream of a book they've ever dreamt, because you're not sure you're ever going to get to write another one. So like, this is your chance, and you put it all in. That was definitely the case with me and my first novel. And so then my brain was empty. I had kind of put it all out there, and I had to figure out what I was going to fill it up again with to write this next book. Of course, I'm sure this is true for a lot of the folks in the audience here. You're not struggling to be interested in something. You're actually interested in too many things. And so the challenge for me at that point, as I was beginning to contemplate this next book, was, what of all these different paths am I going to choose? And at that point, nothing had really grabbed me in that irresistible way. So I'm thinking about this stuff. I'm sort of struggling with the decision, looking at all these interesting things in the world and all the different ways a novel could go, when I went wine tasting. I was up in Boonville. Has anyone here ever actually been to Boonville up in Anderson Valley? Yeah. For those of you who haven't been, well worth a trip. It's about 3 hours north. It's just this lovely little green fold of rustic wineries and breweries and parks and all sorts of things like that. I was up there tasting wine at one winery in particular, tiny little place, like a one-room schoolhouse sort of. They were very serious. A little bit severe, actually, in their whole approach to wine, sort of unsmiling and like, you should enjoy this and take it very seriously. And so they're pouring one wine after another, and they get to one somewhere in the middle of this flight, and the person who was helping us set out those largest wine glasses, the ones that are like the big sort of globular forms with a really sharp, skinny edge. And as she was pouring this wine, which was a red wine, inky dark, like just dark, dark red, she leaned forward a little bit, and her voice was full of conspiracy. I just remember this so well, as she said to us, very meaningfully, this one is a suitcase clone. I see some looks of sort of confusion and consternation in the audience. I don't know if anyone here had ever heard those two words juxtaposed before. I had not, but I really liked the sound of it. Suitcase clone. So I actually, at the time, whipped my notebook out of my back pocket, my ever-present notebook, into which I put all interesting words and phrases I ever run across, street signs or people's names or little things you overhear in cafes. I whipped it out and I said, hold on, say that again, suitcase clone? Okay, what does that mean? And so this is what she told me. This is a real thing, by the way. This is totally just documentary truth from the history of California wine. Turns out that decades ago, especially around the time when California wine was starting to take itself seriously as kind of a peer to the winemakers of the old world, France, Italy, and all the rest, in terms of quality and kind of global reputation, there was this thing that people would do. So let's say it's me. Let's say I'm up there in Anderson Valley. I have some acreage, on the side of a hill somewhere, and I imagine myself a winemaker. I want to plant some grapes there. What I might have done is found a friend, an acquaintance, perhaps someone in this room, a faithful reader of one of my books, and said, how would you like to take a trip? All expenses paid vacation to France, one of the great old winemaking regions, Bordeaux. Go for a week, enjoy yourself. Eat good food, drink good wine, soak up the sun, it'll be great. So you'd do that, you would have a good time, but then maybe, just maybe, on the last day of your trip, you could find yourself, by chance, walking down a path that abuts one of those great old vineyards, like legendary, functioning for hundreds of years in some cases. And maybe, having taken that path along that old vineyard, you could suddenly notice that your shoelace is untied. And so then, of course, you'll duck down low, below the level of the vines, and from some pocket produce a little pair of garden snips, even just a pocket knife, and you'll go snip, snip, and take just a couple cuttings from these plants. Then you go back to the B&B, you take a towel, you wet it under the tap, kind of wring it out so it's not too soggy wet. You wrap up those cuttings to protect them for the journey ahead, put them at the bottom of your luggage, stack all your other stuff on top, and then book it back to California. Very importantly, you do not declare those grape cuttings at customs. Instead, you bring them to me up in Anderson Valley, where I will take them, I will graft them onto American roots, help them grow, and then I'll cut and graft, cloning that legendary grape from whatever vineyard in Bordeaux all across my vineyard. And so then I will have exactly the same substance from which to make my own wine. As an aside, of course, it's not really the same substance. And in fact, the entire thing is a little bit silly because everything's different. The soil is different, the climate is different, all the choices I make in my cultivation are different. But, it has the mystique, the aura, and one thing is indisputably true. Having done this whole circuitous process, I do get to tell people decades later in my tasting room, this one is a suitcase clone. So I don't know how that story strikes you or what else it makes you think of. I can report to you that, kind of to my surprise, I was entranced. I was like, oh, I love it. I love the feeling of it, I think. The combination of something that's very, or seems to be very, traditional and familiar and grounded, like literally rooted, like, come on, like grapes and winemaking, with the very strange and kind of the secret and just the image of someone like skulking through a vineyard at night or smuggling something across borders, that kind of spy vibe. Those two things together seem to me really interesting and really magnetic, honestly. I mean, it was that sense of irresistibility that I've been looking for. So learning about the suitcase clones up in Anderson Valley set me on this hunt for other stories like that, other stories of like normal or traditional seeming foods and other things we eat with kind of a secret backstory. I can report to you, after doing probably way too much research, at a certain point my reading on like all this stuff turned into like very high class procrastination. But I learned a lot, and I can report to you now that the whole history of food and cultivation and eating is more that than anything else. Like everything that seems normal and natural now, everything that we take for granted, it was all smuggled and stolen and misappropriated and moved around the planet. So this was just this whole kind of world of stuff I was learning and all the stories wrapped up in it were so seductive, so perfect, and they set me on this path to sort of writing this book. I want to give you a quick sense, just a little tiny, super short reading from the book of how that came out the other end, like how some of that emerged in the story. So I'm going to read you this tiny bit, and what's happening here is that the protagonist of this novel has found her way into a super secret underground farmer's market, where all the people are doing strange, new, innovative things with food. The most innovative, perhaps, is a microbiologist who's actually splicing the genomes of microbes in an effort to sort of coax them into producing some new, potent kinds of food. Some of her peers at this market are understandably a little skeptical of this whole program, and they tell her, like, nope, we are not okay with this, we are not on board, what you're doing is not natural. The microbiologist replies, are you kidding me? Nothing is natural. And then following that little argument, there's another exchange between two other characters. And this is what they say. After the microbe sequencing session was over, I walked with Horace through the grove at the heart of the market. These are Meyer lemons, Horace said as we passed through the lemon grove. They're named for Frank Nicholas Meyer. He was Dutch by birth, but an agent of the United States government. He worked for the Department of Agriculture's Office of Seed and Plant Introduction before the First World War. And I thought of him when Dr. Jana Mitra spoke of her microbial survey. Meyer and his cohort were hunters for larger prey. They crossed the world and sent back living samples of plants thought to be useful to the advancement of the American economy. Meyer worked in China. He sent the first soybean to America. And persimmons. Any persimmon grown in this country today comes from that lineage. And of course, there are these lemons, named for him. Meyer died in China. He drowned in the Yangtze, pushed from a riverboat. I looked at the lemon trees with newfound appreciation. Horace continued. He sent these across the Pacific, and the Spanish sent tomatoes to Italy in the 16th century, and the Portuguese, chilies to India. Maybe a comet brought it all to Earth in the first place. Who knows? Oh, I quite agree with Dr. Jana Mitra. He plucked a lemon from a tree. Nothing is natural. So that's a big part of the philosophy of this book, and a lot of the sort of characters and the work they do and the arguments they have are kind of bound up in that question of, like, what is traditional, what is normal, what is natural? Maybe nothing really is. But of course, I've been telling you about wine and grapes and suitcase clones, and the title of this book is not The Suitcase Clone, it's Sourdough. So what happened? As I was writing this book, I discovered two things. One kind of personal, the other one actually quite mechanical. The personal thing is that I don't actually care about wine that much, or at least not enough to write a whole novel set in kind of the world of wine and winemaking. The mechanical thing, though, this is pretty nerdy. It kind of gets into the weeds of how fiction comes together, but I think people tend to be interested in this kind of stuff. I discovered something that surprised me. I was trying to sort of sequence these stories about wine and figure out how things might happen and how you might discover, you know, the secret of, say, this super mysterious suitcase clone. And I realized that almost by definition, a story about winemaking runs really slow. Its clock ticks year by year by year, vintage by vintage by vintage. So again, almost by definition, the book you're going to write is going to be this sort of slow generational story, and you know, members of a family are going to be getting older, relationships shifting, they're going to be, you know, harvesting grapes every year, and sure enough, you'll learn things about this grape year by year, and eventually, you know, someone will kind of crack the code, and its mysterious origins will become apparent. But it's going to happen after years and years and years. You know, the dog, the golden retriever in the field, it's muzzle getting gray, and it's all sort of very warm and nostalgic and all that. Sounds like an interesting book. I would probably read that book, actually. But I didn't think it was the kind of book that I wanted to write or the kind that I'd be good at writing. The kind of books that I write best, I think, at least so far, are books that are about now, books about the moment we're in, and maybe kind of the next 15 minutes into the future. That's just what I'm interested in myself. It's what gets me excited. So figuring out how I was going to anchor this story that was going to be about food and eating and the mysteries and the secrets kind of bound up in these worlds became almost like balancing an equation from like middle school math, like really, really simple. You've got some things that you want to hold constant and another value that you're trying to find. So the things I was holding constant were the following: food and eating and secret histories. I mean, that was what I had gotten so fascinated by. I wanted it, the sort of the core substance or the sort of subgenre of food and eating to be something I actually cared more about and was more intrinsically interested in myself, and maybe something I knew more about naturally. And finally, importantly, it had to be something with a faster clock speed, something that could reveal its secrets, something you could kind of work with and ask questions about, not year by year by year, but day by day by day, or even faster, hour by hour by hour. And truly, I discovered the solution that kind of balanced this equation perfectly sitting there in a scummy little mason jar in my kitchen, and it was my sourdough starter. And for anyone who doesn't know, which some people take it so for granted, but other people actually never learned this, and I was one of them until not that long ago. Sourdough Starter is a little community of microorganisms. You feed it every day if you're a sourdough baker, and it kind of rises and falls, and it's a key ingredient in making sourdough bread. It gives it its texture by kind of inflating and producing gas. It also gives it a lot of its flavor, just because of some of the chemicals that these little microbes produce. And truly, it is less ingredient and more roommate. It is like a little gang of living organisms that you have to care for and kind of respect their demands in some cases. So I realized that sourdough was going to be it for me. Sourdough was going to be the key because you can use it every day, and just like a cutting from a grape plant, a sourdough starter in its little container could of course be something that someone smuggled across borders under cover of darkness. So that's the core of the story. It is indeed about a mysterious sourdough starter that it soon becomes apparent has properties, powers perhaps, that are much stranger than your everyday San Francisco sourdough starter. I actually think that in the history of English literature so far as I know, as far as I've been able to kind of research, this is the first novel to feature as a very important supporting character a sentient sourdough starter. And I'm proud of that distinction. So I want to share with you guys something that kind of sprung immediately out of that decision to anchor this book in the sourdough starter, and something that's actually quite googly, I think. So as you may or might not know, audiobooks are super popular, just like soaring popularity. They're the part of the publishing industry that's growing. Like everything else is kind of maintaining and kind of trying to keep it together and stay healthy and just kind of fight the tides of digital stuff. Audiobooks are this one great exception where they're just going like gangbusters. So appropriately, audiobook producers are taking their task really seriously. They're trying to produce things that are not just kind of flat recitations of the words on the page, but are productions in their own right. So one of the things they do is they reach out to you, the author of a book about to be transformed into an audiobook. They ask you for something different, something special. They want to make the audiobook distinct. So sure enough, for the sourdough audiobook, I wrote a little bit of extra text, just a few little nuggets that we kind of slipped in there, almost as like Easter eggs for people who listened to the book rather than read it on the page. But there's something else too. Now, something else has to do with the story. It has to do with the sourdough starter. In my sort of fictional imaginings, it is brought to San Francisco by a couple of mysterious brothers. They are from a culture, pun not totally intended, that is very mysterious, not known by many people, and it has a few sort of things, hallmarks of its of its people and its history. One of them is this particular sourdough starter, which has been going for a long time. They bake their bread with it, and it is very, very good bread. But then to go along with that, they have songs. They have a particular genre of music, and they actually sing these songs to the sourdough starter, and it's really important to its development. And I mean, truly, these two things together, the starter and the songs, they make the whole story go. Without them, like, nothing happens. This is just the story of a sort of a mildly depressed software engineer in San Francisco. So I talk about it so much, and I write so many descriptions of this music, you know? This, of course, is the great affordance of fiction. I can write something like, just for example, Lois pressed play on the blank CD that one of the mysterious brothers had given her. The music started to play, slow and sad, nothing but voices curling together in a language that she didn't recognize, but danced just on the edge of legibility, dot, dot, dot. And you're like, oh, okay, I can kind of hear it, right? I mean, this is how fiction works. You write something that kind of gets the reader halfway there, and then you let them go the rest of the way themselves. Every novel exists probably more than halfway towards the reader's mind than the author's, which is amazing. I think this is like why this is such an amazing and powerful medium. But knowing that I was describing music, audio, and this is an audio book, I had the sense it was going to be frustrating if somebody listened to the entire, like, however many dozens of hours of this thing and didn't get to hear at least the tiniest whisper of this fictional music. I was like, come on, seriously? So this was a challenge because we could not afford to hire the people who, like, invent Dothraki for Game of Thrones, much less a choir to perform it and then record it and play in the audiobook. So we needed something a little more rough and ready because I live and work here in the San Francisco Bay Area and am interested in code and technology and all these things and have been forever and just am an inveterate kind of tinkerer and explorer with these things. I knew about machine learning. I knew what some of the tools were capable of, and I tinkered with them a bit myself. And of course, as some of you might already know, one of the things that a machine learning system can do is sort of extract patterns. You can give it this big set of training data. It could be text, images, indeed, even audio, and set this challenge. Say, like, I want you to kind of figure out what the pieces of this are, what makes this the way it is, and then I want you to be able to generate new things that fit those patterns. You're not allowed to just copy and paste. You can't just play back what I gave you. You've got to come up with something new, but it has to kind of fit that pattern in a really rough way. I run experiments with text, and the results were weird, but compelling, I thought, actually really creatively provocative. And so I had the sense that maybe I could apply this to the problem of the music. So just to kind of get you up to speed where I was starting from, there was a kind of music, or there is a kind of music that's real that I had listened to for years and really enjoyed. That was kind of in my head when I was imagining this mysterious language and this mysterious, slow, sad music in the book. That kind of real music, it's called Klapa, K-L-A-P-A. It's Croatian. It's all a cappella, sort of choral singing. It's really lovely. I'm going to play you a little example here, and I think I can just play it into my microphone, and it'll work okay. This is real-life Croatian Klapa music. It's nice. It also kind of sounds like that. A big part of the appeal for me, of course, is that I do not understand Croatian, so it has that sort of opaqueness, like, oh, what are they singing about? Oh, I don't know, but it's so sort of melancholic and slow and sad. I just love it. I knew we couldn't just put Klapa in the audiobook because even if it kind of does the trick for me, there's plenty of people in the world who do speak Croatian. They'd be like, why is there a weird Croatian song in this audiobook? Like, the songs are all about something, and it just seemed kind of in poor taste, in fact, to sort of take somebody else's language and say, no, I'm going to use it as my fictional stand-in. I wanted to use this machine learning method instead to create something that was no language at all, no language on Earth. So I took my collection of Croatian Klapa MP3s, lovingly assembled over the years, just this big kind of junk pile of things I'd scraped from all sorts of sources online. I fed those into a neural network, and I set it this task. I was like, learn the patterns, like learn something of the essence that makes this music what it is, and then use that to generate some new music. So this is what I got. So it's pretty weird. To my ear, at least, it is weird in like the right way. It has that sense, and there's reasons for this. You can hear the human voices there, right? You can tell that that's something human, the sort of syllables and phonemes and little fragments, but it's not Croatian. It's definitely not English. It's, in fact, no language at all. I think that's actually sort of exciting, an exciting creative artifact. We could take the snippets of this music. Oh, so I should complete the thought. I generated a bunch of sounds just like the ones you heard, like hundreds, most of which were just too weird to kind of even contemplate, but some of which, for just out of pure chance, kind of had a loveliness to them. Some interesting things were happening. So I curated those down. I zipped them up, and I attached them to an email, which I sent to the audiobook producers. And I really, really hope that that's like the weirdest thing they've ever gotten. And the task, I said, listen, this is actually kind of what I imagine this music sounds like. So if you can find some snippets in here that you can use, feel free to cut and paste and manipulate, do whatever you need to do. But maybe we can find a way to slip this into the audiobook. And sure enough, the audiobook for Sourdough is, as far as I know, the first audiobook ever to feature, like in its experience, the output of a neural network. Small distinctions. I will take them. I will always take a small distinction that no one else cares about. There's one other thing I want to share before I close out and answer some of your questions. One of the things I learned producing all of these weird little tracks, of course, they were always unpredictable. They just always had sort of a different shape and a different sound. Of course, the way this works, for some of you will know this already, but for those of you who don't, it's all probabilistic. Like I always take great pains describing this project not to use the word artificial intelligence, because there are some things that sort of are beginning to dance toward that boundary, something you really could call like AI. This assuredly is not. It's totally statistical and kind of probabilistic. It's really just about learning a statistical model of a particular thing. The way that works, and it works the same way with text, with images, with sound when you're using these techniques. If we're talking about text, and I had asked this thing not to learn Croatian klapa, but to learn Melville, or to learn Harry Potter, or like any kind of English prose, one of the things it would have learned at the most basic level is that given the letter T and then the letter H, the next letter it ought to generate is almost certainly E or A or O. I mean, definitely a vowel, something like that. It is definitely not, or with such a vanishingly low probability, Z or Q or X. And you can imagine very easily kind of building a network of all these probabilities as they all build one on another, on another, and another, and eventually you end up with this really sort of interesting and powerful statistical model of like how you make a sentence from a Harry Potter book. It's really cool, but it's also strangely simple. So one of the things I learned, to my surprise, is that following that same model, one of these neural networks trained on Croatian choral music, or I suspect any kind of recorded music, one of the first things it learns is that if it selects a sample of silence, or just like a really, really quiet sample, and then another sample of silence, there's a very, very good chance it ought to next select another sample of silence. Because it turns out little chunks of silence are one of the most common things, one of the most reliable sort of artifacts in any one of these files. They're the big silence at the beginning, the fade out at the end, even the spaces between movements, or even in the case of this choral music, the spaces where the whole choir takes a breath, and they all go, oh, and it kind of just vanishes into this void for a minute. And of course, these neural networks, they don't have a sense of the whole track. They only have a sense of this small window they're looking at any particular time. And so they become very, very confident in silence. They're like, OK, one really quiet sample, another quiet sample. Oh, I got this, another quiet sample. And then having generated that quiet sample, I'm even more sure that the next one ought to be silent, and on and on and on. What that meant is that very often I would ask this neural network to generate a new 30-second song or a minute-long song. It would kind of churn and crunch. It would take a little while to do that, 5 minutes or 7 minutes, and it would spit out this file, and I would very excitedly hit play to see what the new song was going to be, and I would hear this totally confident nothing. So I got very used to kind of dragging those into the trash and trying again. There was, however, in addition to the sort of very confident silent tracks, and then the sort of more interesting, sort of bubbling, percolating tracks like the one I played first, there was a third kind too. And it actually became my favorite. I just want to share it with you now, because I think it's sort of a remarkable creative artifact. Of course, these probabilities are not definite. I mean, they're all just sort of values, smushy values on a wide scale. And so even if something has a super small chance of ever happening, 1/10,000th of 1% or whatever it is, you run the computer for long enough and it could happen. So sure enough, some of these files open up and the computer is just locked into this confident groove of silence. What could be easier? Yes, I have learned the secrets of human composition. Silence. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. But at each one of those samples, some calculation is being made. And who knows what happens? At one moment, something trembles in the computer's little random number generator, and it sparks just enough to tip a domino in a different direction. And having tipped in that other direction, we're off to the races. Because suddenly, you're not calculating what's sort of most confidently following silence, but something else. And I love that moment. I think it's really beautiful, actually, because there's no reason for it. It just happens sometimes. I want to share one with you. This is a track that I started playing, and at first I despaired, because I thought it was going to be another one of these silent ones. But I was a little bit patient, and so I want you to be a little bit patient, too. It's going to start with silence, which is by design, but then you're going to hear, just a little ways in, something in the universe trembles, and we get something else instead. No reason for any of that to happen, but it did happen, and it's really lovely. And I have decided that I think that is what having an idea sounds like. And with that, I'll say thank you for your time.
Penumbra had a lot of interesting literary devices in it, like from the short story where the narrator is really unreliable and you never see any exact quotes they have. So I'm kind of curious, what literary devices should I be looking forward to in this book?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't know that I have a direct answer, often because those tricky little things emerge, sometimes even to my own surprise in this writing. I kind of follow a feeling and realize only in retrospect that I've hopefully done something interesting. I did try to make the starter, the sourdough starter, a character. I wanted it to be not just an object, but sort of a character with a will of its own in the story. But I wanted to do so in a hard sci-fi way. It never talks. It never goes, "I'm the sourdough starter, thank you for unlocking me," It operates in a way that I think is credible, even if at a certain point it gets pretty weird. But I think it's all within the realm of what's possible in our real universe. And so I guess that's the thing I would say to look for, the way that I have it sort of communicate and talk and express its opinions to the narrator. I don't know if I succeeded in what I set out to do, but I wanted to make this thing seem like a character without making it like a cartoon.
It seems like your books span multiple genres. How would you classify them?
Oh, that's a hard question. I don't really believe in genres anymore. I think there's good reason not to. They're getting so blurred, and people are reading so deeply into one genre only to extract ideas and then use them in a different genre. The books sit on the fiction shelf, which I guess is the best shelf for them now. Earlier, I was chatting with some other people about the idea of a new genre called puzzle fiction, which I'm sort of newly excited about. But if there was a shelf at a bookstore, and it was like there's the fiction shelf here and the science fiction shelf here, and then there was just a little shelf that was between them, and it was for like books both written by and I guess written for people who love the contents of both those shelves, that's the right home for, I think, everything that I write. Well, cool. Thank you guys for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming out. And also, I'll be happy to sign your books if you want.